Did you know the Bible never actually calls them the Ten Commandments? This may sound shocking, but it's true. The two stone tablets, often referred to as the Ten Commandments, are never explicitly called that in the original biblical texts. In fact, the words Ten Commandments are a relatively modern term that emerged over time. In the original Hebrew and Greek texts, they were called something entirely different, something that changes the way we might view these ancient laws. So, how did we go from the 10 words to the 10 commandments? And why does this shift in naming matter? Stick around as we uncover the surprising truth behind this biblical misnomer and explore the potential reasons for this rebranding. You might find that there's more to the story than meets the eye. Let's start with the original Hebrew text. When Moses descended Mount Sinai with those two stone tablets, they weren't called the 10 Commandments. In Hebrew, they are referred to as Aseret HaDibrot, which translates to the 10 words. Not commandments, words. This is the term that appears in the Torah, the foundational text for both Judaism and Christianity. Now, why words and not commandments? The choice of the word words is intriguing. Words can be statements, utterances, or expressions of truth. They don't necessarily carry the weight of orders or mandates. In the ancient context, these 10 words were seen more as a covenant between God and his people, a set of guiding principles rather than strict commands. When the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, the term Decalogue was used, which also means 10 words. The Greek translators chose to preserve the essence of the original Hebrew phrase. This decision suggests a continuity in how these tablets were understood, not as a set of rigid laws, but as 10 divine expressions or declarations. Why would the original texts use words instead of commandments? Could it be that the nature of these instructions was meant to be more relational than authoritative? This phrasing leaves room for interpretation. It suggests that these words are meant to guide rather than dictate, to shape the moral fabric of a community rather than to impose an authoritarian rule. So, what happened? How did we end up calling them commandments? Moving forward in history, let's look at how these texts were translated into Latin. The Latin Vulgate, a critical early translation of the Bible, used the term detum verba, meaning 10 words. This phraseology was consistent with the original Hebrew and Greek texts, maintaining the idea of these being divine utterances rather than direct orders. This choice by the translators of the Vulgate suggests that early Christianity still viewed these 10 declarations in a broader, more nuanced light. Fast forward to the 1500s and the emergence of William Tyndale, one of the first translators of the Bible into English. Tyndale referred to these divine utterances as the 10 verses. Again, not commandments, but verses. This choice further emphasizes the idea that these were more than just a list of do's and don'ts. They were verses, much like poetry or sacred text meant for contemplation and guidance. Here's where it gets interesting. Why did early translators continue to use terms like words or verses? Could it be that they were trying to preserve a certain theological perspective? Perhaps they wanted to keep the focus on the spiritual, moral, and covenantal aspects of these 10 declarations rather than framing them as a strict legal code. Now, let's discuss the game changer, the King James Version of the Bible. The KJV is one of the most influential and widely recognized English translations of the Bible, and it was here that we first see the introduction of the term 10 Commandments. This change marked a significant departure from all previous translations that referred to these divine decrees as 10 words or 10 verses. But why was this change made? What prompted the translators of the KJV to choose the term commandments over the original words? To understand this, we need to consider the historical and political context of the early 17th century. The KJV was commissioned by King James I of England in 1604, during a period when the monarchy was actively asserting its divine right to rule. The idea of a set of commandments aligns perfectly with a hierarchical structure, where commands are issued by a higher authority and must be obeyed without question. This was a time when the power and authority of the king were directly connected to the will of God, and religious texts were used to reinforce this structure. By branding these divine decrees as commandments, the KJV translators were not merely translating words. They were interpreting and framing these divine declarations in a way that demanded absolute obedience. This interpretation fit seamlessly into the political landscape of the time, which was centered around the concepts of authority, obedience, and control. In essence, by calling them commandments, the KJV reinforced the notion that these were not just guiding principles but strict laws that required unwavering compliance. King James I was not just any monarch. He was a ruler who staunchly believed in the doctrine of the divine right of kings. This belief held that the king was God's appointed ruler on earth, and his authority was therefore absolute and unquestionable. To maintain this divine right, it was essential that his version of the Bible reflect and reinforce this worldview. By introducing the term 10 Commandments, the KJV did just that. It emphasized the idea that authority comes directly from God, is passed down to the king, and from the king to his subjects. This top-down model of power and obedience was an effective way of ensuring that the king's subjects understood their place in the social and religious hierarchy. The framing of these divine decrees as commandments rather than words or verses made it clear that these were not suggestions or even guidelines but mandatory laws that needed to be followed. This shift had profound implications for Christian doctrine and practice. The term 10 Commandments quickly became ingrained in religious teaching, and over the centuries, it has shaped the way generations of believers have understood these ancient decrees. Instead of being viewed as a part of a covenantal relationship between God and his people, they have become a list of rules to be followed, often without question. This rebranding leads us to a larger and more intriguing question. If such a significant shift in interpretation could occur with the 10 words, what other aspects of the Bible might have been similarly altered or rebranded to serve specific agendas? Could other terms or concepts in the Bible have been adapted to reflect the political or theological needs of those in power? This is a compelling question that encourages us to dig deeper into the history of biblical interpretation and translation. It's a reminder that translations of sacred texts are not just linguistic exercises but are also influenced by the cultural, political, and religious contexts in which they are made. As we explore these ancient texts, it's worth considering what other elements might have been subtly reshaped to fit the prevailing ideologies of the time. Thank you for joining us on this fascinating journey. If you found this video enlightening, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more insights into biblical stories and their hidden meanings.